for more on the day's other big stories, let's bring in the Daily Telegraph's political editor and Sky News host, James Morrow. James, great to see you. Look, big and worrying news today that the RBA will raise the cash rate again this year if price pressures remain high. We've just seen today the board minutes from the May meeting. They were released and they reveal the RBA's concern that falling productivity could embed high inflation. James, inflation's currently at 7%. It's not expected to get back into the target zone of 2 to 3% until 2025. So when the RBA says, or when these minutes reveal that it's concerned about entrenched inflation, this is dangerous territory.
It is dangerous territory, and the real danger here, Shari, of course, is that the RBA bludgeons the economy into a recession in order to fight inflation. Part of the problem here that we have with this inflation is that it's very what they call sticky. It's hard to bring down. Once you get rid of the supply chain things that are pushing prices up, the service part of the economy, that's where, those cost increases are, and that's where you need more productivity to bring that down. So I'm afraid until you start to get some real economic reform, and we saw precious little of that in Jim Chalmers' budget last week, then we're not going to really start to see, the economy start to come back and lose some of that inflation and let those interest rates then start to come down. That said, they're never going to come down where they were. That whole era of free money that we were in, that's not coming back for a very long time.
Yeah, I think we are looking for sure at another couple of rate rises this year. I mean, although everyone has a different opinion on just how many that will be. James, another big issue, Joe Biden, US president, he's set to arrive in Australia this month. His trip might be in doubt because of the debt ceiling issue in the US. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was asked about this today.
Is President Biden still coming to the Quad?
Yes, hosting the Quad is a big deal for Australia, and I look forward to welcoming President Biden to Australia.
James, I know you're following the debt ceiling crisis in the US closely. Of course, you're host of the US Report on a Friday evening here on Sky News. Do you think we could be seeing Kamala Harris visit Australia instead of Joe Biden?
Oh, look, part of me would love to see that just because I think it would be very entertaining and we'd have lots and lots of good, fun clips for the U.S. report out of that. But that said, I don't think we're going to see Joe Biden not get on that plane. This is a very important trip for him to come. It is the Quad, getting the Quad together. These debt ceiling crises, Shari, they come and go. We've seen so many of these in recent years, last decade or two. They always wind up getting resolved one way or the other. One thing we're seeing here, though, is the Republicans being a bit more punchy on this and saying, no, you really have to come to the party and cut spending. They've put a proposal on the table, and the Democrats are going to have to move somewhere on this. But I do not think, the U.S. is going to default on its debt, and I do not think that Joe Biden winds up staying in Washington to hash this out or be present in the room while his advisors hash this out rather than come down to Australia for the Quad.
Right. Well, Anthony Albanese today was also forced to rule out changes to negative gearing, this as the issue of housing supply continues to escalate. He's under pressure from some Labor MPs, also Labor figures at National Conference who want to put this issue back on the table. James, this is an unpopular policy. Why is Albanese now under pressure from his own party to revisit it?
Well, it depends on who you want to say it's unpopular with. I mean, negative gearing is very popular with older people in the population.
Oh, no, I mean changes to negative gearing policy
are very unpopular.
unpopular.
They are
what
unpopular.
I mean. Yeah.
Sorry, Sherry. No. They are unpopular, but, he's being dragged to the left by the left wing of his party. And, of course, the fact that you've got these Greens who he is in virtual coalition with, they went out today and they also said it's time to do something about negative gearing. But this has become sort of this totemic issue that's almost beyond the economics of it. You could end it tomorrow and it's not going to make any more houses available. In fact, it might make the situation worse. But what it's about, though, is about people on the left not liking people, ordinary Australians, using property as a vehicle to build wealth. That's what this is really about, Shari.
Look, still on the housing issue, the new New South Wales Labor Premier Chris Minns, there's criticism that he is going against his election commitment of no privatisation. He argues against this, but the government says it's open to selling public land to developers. this is part of the argument about unlocking land because there is this housing crisis at the moment. Chris Minns is also pushing for councils to allow development to go up, to have more apartment blocks. He says that the building of apartment blocks is at its lowest level since 2014. So, this is an interesting debate as well that's happening in New South Wales.
Yeah, look, I think the arguments that he's, privatizing by giving public land to build some, new housing, I don't think that that's quite the sort of privatization that people generally think of, selling off a utility, selling off a road, selling off that sort of thing. But I do think Chris Minns here, he makes some fundamental mistakes here when he talks about what we want to be as a city here in Sydney. He says, well, New York never says it's full. Well, the reason why New York doesn't say it's full is because New York is actually shrinking in its population. And the trend lines around the world is, in fact, that many cities are starting to lose population. And we need to be thinking not just in terms of how do we solve the immediate crisis of the next year, 2, 5 years, but what do our cities look like when we're all working from home, when everybody in the service sector is largely working from home, when there's AI doing lots of jobs? And I worry that we're going to build a city for tomorrow that's not going to age well, and it's going to be, not where people want to live in 20 years. Yes, I understand there's a crisis, but, you got to be really thoughtful and think long-term about bricks and mortar, which takes a long time to build and a long time to undo if you get it wrong.
All right, well, that debate will forge ahead. Now, finally, James, the outgoing head of the Australian Workers' Union, Dan Walton, he's put an interesting proposal on the table as he leaves. And as I say, he's a union leader. He's saying that we should be putting a punitive tax on our rare mineral exports to China. And he's also speaking about lessening our reliance on China as a trading partner. What do you think about this?
Look, I'm a big fan of Dan Walton's, and, sorry to see him go as head of the AWU. He's one of the most reasonable, interesting, smart people in the union movement, and he'll be a real loss to that, I think. As far as this proposal, though, goes, it's an interesting idea, but I think it's a bit half-baked because, well, China's just going to get its minerals from somewhere else, and probably someplace with a lot less environmental protections than we have here in terms of getting stuff out of the ground. But I'd rather see something rather than punitive, some sort of way to encourage us to have more industry, to take that lithium and all the other critical minerals we're pulling out of the ground and turn them into things here, turn them into batteries, turn them into chips, turn them into those value-added goods. I don't think a tax on stuff going out the door, is really the way to do that. But I think the end goal that he's talking about is a worthwhile one.